Joining us now is Ralph Silva, analyst at Silva Research Network, with more than 20 years' experience in investment banking. Morning to you, Ralph. What do you think they're going to do today?
I think they're going to do pretty well nothing. They're just going to keep everything going as before, and the reason for that is it's just too early to make the change. Now, I have actually noticed that there's a mood change within all the central banks throughout all of Europe, actually all the central banks globally. They're starting to get fed up. They're not quite there yet, but I think we're at that precipice where they're going to start allowing some banks just to go belly up.
Which ones and where?
That's a good question. Quite frankly, what's been happening is just unheard of. We have some banks that have taken the generosity of governments and have turned themselves away. We should give them credit for that. But all these banks that have taken the generosity and haven't turned their banks around, I think most of the governments are now saying, why are we saving these organizations? We're going to let them
And we're talking what? The smaller, sort of like the Cajas in Spain, that sort of thing?
Spain and Germany are probably going to be the two hardest hits in terms of the total number of banks that are either going to be forced into merger or just going to be let to die. But the vast majority of them are going to be small to medium-sized businesses, but there are a few big ones. So RBS, Lloyds, those are questions. Should we sustain both these organizations in the UK?
And what would happen, Ralph, if we decide, or it is decided, that no, we're not going to sustain these?
Yeah, and that's a big question, is who's going to be the first one? Which government's going to have the courage to say no more?
Because it ain't going to be France, that's for sure. Leading sort of like reports this morning that saying that the French government may be sort of like interested in buying bits and bobs of various institutions.
Sure, and they're going to have to because there's so few banks in France. So France is probably the one country that we're going to see the least amount of disruption because they can't afford to have a lot of disruption. But we have over 7,000 banks in Europe, so some of them, of course, will be allowed to die. What's going to happen? We're going to see some huge volatility in the marketplace for at least 2 or 3 weeks after the first one goes down. And in my opinion, it's going to settle down and it's going to be part of course. This is just what's going to happen.
Yeah, but it's going to be a domino effect, Ralph, isn't it? Once the first one goes down, everybody will be looking at what the next one is going to be. And if a government has already let one bank go, then the vulnerability isn't going to be increased in all the others.
As an investor in financial services, I'll start to get worried when a third of the banks are gone. Anything beyond that, then I'll get worried. We have a complete oversupply of financial services products in Europe. We have to fix that. The banks that are doing a good job can't survive because they can't make any money because we have all these other banks that are getting government money and competing when in fact they shouldn't be.
Mrs. Merkel said earlier on that time is running out to establish is the key point here, if recapitalisation of the banks is necessary. Your views on that?
They've had 3 years to recapitalise. They've known this was coming. They've had 3 years of the same economic conditions. They've had 3 years when they know the regulatory changes. If they haven't done it, for God's sakes, become a farmer because you're a lousy banker. And we should let these banks go because they've had sufficient time. The banks that have turned themselves around, they need to be supported. They will be supported. But all these ones that haven't actually made any steps, let's let them go. And I think Angela Merkel is probably going to be the first one to say enough is enough.
Jean-Claude Trichet's last news conference, will he be missed?
I think he will be missed because he did have a sense of...
Depends where you come from, I suppose.
Good point, good point. But I think that he actually has had a pretty calming voice throughout this entire crisis. I don't think he's done the perfect job, but I don't think anybody could have done the perfect job because this was completely uncharted territory.
And do you think bondholders really need to take a much bigger haircut than some 50-60% on the Greek debt book that they hold?
I think that's inevitable, and I think that investors as a whole have to start looking at their portfolios and have to identify the types of holdings that they have that might actually take haircuts. Sovereign wealth is one of them. The other one is banks. I think we're at that precipice where we're going to start to see investors taking the hit because governments are not going to.
And Mario Draghi is the man to be pushing that through. Do you think we're really going to see more than just a change of tone from the ECB in coming weeks and months?
Like I said, I think all of Europe, we're starting to see that change of tone. I think he's just going to be at the forefront of that because he has an opportunity to do that. Things are going to change. In the next 3 or 4 months, we're actually going to see a radical change in the behavior of governments towards banks.
Ralph Silva from Silva Research Network, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.